Imagine standing with your family, pinned against a massive, churning body of water. There is nowhere left to run. To your left and right, terrain blocks your path. There are no bridges and no boats. And closing in quickly from behind is the most powerful military force on Earth, riding hundreds of war chariots. Then, an 80-year-old shepherd named Moses steps to the water's edge. He raises a wooden staff. The wind begins to roar, and the deep waters unnaturally begin to shift and divide. Did this really happen? Whether viewed as sacred scripture or ancient lore, the crossing of the Red Sea remains history's ultimate account of surviving impossible odds. The crisis at the sea began centuries earlier. The descendants of Jacob, known as Israel, had settled in Egypt and grown into a massive population. Fearing their numbers, a new pharaoh stripped them of their freedom, forcing generations to build cities and make bricks under brutal, crushing labor. According to the biblical account, the Israelites' cries for help were answered when God called Moses out of exile. Speaking through a burning bush, God commanded the reluctant shepherd to return to Egypt and demand the immediate release of the enslaved people. Pharaoh refused. In response, a series of 10 devastating plagues systematically dismantled Egypt's economy and ecology. The Nile turned to blood, swarms of locusts devoured the crops, and darkness blanketed the empire. The climax was the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. The Israelites were spared only by sacrificing a lamb and painting its blood on their doorposts, causing the judgment to pass over their homes. Broken by this tragedy, Pharaoh finally let the Israelites leave. But this was a desperate, chaotic rupture. The sudden loss of an entire slave workforce guaranteed a violent retaliation. The Israelites' joy was incredibly brief. Realizing the total economic collapse his empire now faced without its forced laborers, Pharaoh quickly mobilized his military to hunt them down. He deployed hundreds of elite Egyptian chariots. These were the ancient world's equivalent of fighter jets, fast, heavily armed, and technologically superior, easily overtaking the slow-moving families on foot. This satellite view shows the region where the Israelites were finally cornered. English Bibles call it the Red Sea, but the original Hebrew phrase is Yam Suf, which translates to Sea of Reeds. Many researchers argue the crossing actually happened here, in the marshy, reed-filled lakes just north of the Red Sea's main body. As we move down the map, we see competing archaeological theories. Some scholars point to the western fork, the Gulf of Suez, while others argue the fleeing Israelites traveled further across the Sinai Peninsula to the eastern fork, the Gulf of Aqaba. Even without universal agreement on the exact coordinates, the strategic reality of the text is clear. An unarmed civilian population was deliberately driven into a geographical dead end, wedged between deep water and drawn weapons. Facing certain slaughter, panic swept through the Israelite camp. Many screamed they would rather go back to making bricks than die in the desert. Moses responded with a simple, definitive command: "Fear ye not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord." The book of Exodus describes a staggering physical mechanic. An intense east wind roared through the darkness all night, violently pushing the waters apart to carve a dry channel straight through the seabed. Millions of people, carrying children and herding livestock, walked across this newly exposed ground. The liquid walls stood towering on both sides as they marched through the cold night. Seeing the path, the Egyptian army blindly charged in. But when the last Israelite reached the opposite shore, Moses stretched out his hand. The massive walls of water collapsed, instantly burying the chariots. In a single catastrophic moment, the ancient world's most formidable superpower was neutralized. The army was gone, and the chains of Egyptian bondage were severed entirely. When the sun rose, the terror of the previous night gave way to a stark, arid landscape. The Israelites stepped onto the Sinai Peninsula as a completely free people. For Judaism, this moment is the ultimate proof of God's covenant. The deliverance at the sea established Israel's identity, proving they were protected by a force greater than any human empire. It is an escape that is actively remembered. Every year during the Passover Seder, Jewish families around the world eat flatbread and bitter herbs, deliberately recalling the bitterness of slavery
and the sudden, miraculous rescue at the water's edge.
In Christianity, the narrative carries deep symbolic weight. Passing through the divided waters is directly compared to baptism, leaving behind the captivity of an old life for a rebirth into a new one. The scale of the story reaches far beyond its religious origins. For 3 millennia, marginalized communities, civil rights leaders, and those fighting oppression have looked to Moses as the ultimate archetype of hope against tyranny. The crossing of the Red Sea endures because it offers a timeless truth about human liberation. Even when every path forward appears completely blocked by an uncrossable obstacle, deliverance often requires taking a single courageous step forward.